Now that we have our pro forma for Simply Sales built with links to our percentage increase in sales, and we can change those again from 25% to 10% in both our income statement and our balance sheet change accordingly. We could have picked a 40% sales growth, and again, our income statement changes and our balance sheet changes accordingly. Let's think about how useful our pro forma is. One, from a perspective of, do we really think everything will change at the same percentage of sales? For instance, if we have a 10% sales growth, certainly maybe we can maintain our same gross profit margin, but what if our sales growth we wanted to talk about was going to double? Sales were going to increase from 10% to 100% sales growth. Do we really think we could maintain the same gross profit margin? Probably not, because to achieve that type of sales growth, we're probably going to have to lower our prices. In 2011, our gross profit was 10%. That's the $1,000 in gross profit divided by net sales, 10%. And so if we wanted to double sales, we're going to have to think about how we would end up lowering our gross profit margin. And let's say that we thought to achieve a doubling of sales, we would have to be willing to accept a 5% gross profit margin. That means cost of goods sold is increasing faster than our sales. So if sales are up 100%, maybe cost of goods sold is up 110%. Not quite there. That would only give us a gross profit margin of 6%. Let's try a 115% increase in cost of goods sold. That's too high. Let's try 112%. That seems pretty much spot on, except I bet you if we increase the decimals on this from 5% to 5.1, yep, with one extra decimal point, it's only 4.6%. So the 112 is probably too high. Let's try 111%. And we can see we're pretty much there, although I bet you, once again, if we were to increase the decimal places, yep, we're not quite at exactly a 5% gross profit margin. When we talk about a gross profit margin of 5%, we're really saying we want cost of goods sold to be 95% of sales. So instead of doing a percentage increase, what if we changed our pro forma, both the formula and our factor, and all the way across? Let's specify cost of goods sold as a percentage of sales. So for our factor, we want it to be 95% of sales. So 95% is our factor. And for our formula, we'll simply take sales and multiply that by 95%. Now we have a pro forma that gives us a cost of goods sold of 95% of sales and a gross profit margin of exactly 5%. And it doesn't matter whether we specified 100% sales growth, 50% sales growth, 10% sales growth, our gross profit margin will be 5%. Now, we can easily get back to where we were with our pro forma earlier, which was what, a 25% sales growth, cost of goods sold was 90%. That should be the same pro forma you have in front of you to start with. Selling and administrative expenses, again, this is coming from our common size income statement, are often also expressed as a percentage of sales. So let's change our factors and our links for both of those. So our percentage of sales, common size income statement, our SG&A was $700 on $10,000 in sales. Our SG&A was 7% of sales. So for our formula, equals sales, current year, times 7%. And we've got, again, a much more functional and usable pro forma. Let's take a look at our balance sheet accounts. Right now we have our balance sheet set up, everything is a percentage increase in sales. But quite often we talk about accounts receivable in terms of a collection period. And we talk about inventory in terms of inventory turnover. How could we modify our pro formas to do that? Let's go to our ratio page. Currently, our collection period is 10.95 days, and our inventory period is, our inventory turnover is 15 times. Let's incorporate those into our pro forma. So 10.95 days and an inventory turnover of 10. So let's go ahead and delete what we've got here right now. Collection period 10.95. Oh, we have to change the formatting on that. 10.95. And our inventory turnover was going to be 15 days. Now, in terms of accounts receivable, we will calculate our accounts receivable simply by taking our average daily sales, how much do we sell on average each day, and multiply it by that collection period. So, average daily sales will be equals our income statement. Sales we find up right there, 2012, cell C6, divided by 365. There we go. That's our average daily sales of 34, and we said we need to multiply that by how many days are in our collection period? 10.95. And again, we have the same number on the pro forma right there in front of you, but we can now talk about extending our collection period to say 15 days. How would receivables change? We could talk about cutting our collection period to 5 days. How would accounts receivable change? Or again, we could leave it just the way we have it. Inventory turnover. Our inventory turnover ratio, recall, is inventory or cost of goods sold divided by inventory. So we can calculate our inventory by simply taking our cost of goods sold. Annual cost of goods sold is 1,250, and let's divide that by the cell, which is cell D9 on our balance sheet. That was our turnover. We were saying it was going to turn over 15 times. So if we have sales of 11,250, and we're turning it over 15 times a year, we would need to have roughly $750 on inventory on hand. If we were turning it over slower, our inventory would go up. If we could turn it over faster, our inventory would go down. So quite often, it's easier to talk about pro formas in terms of factors or some of the ratios that we have that are fairly common. We might want to talk about fixed assets in terms of the fixed asset turnover. We have a fixed asset turnover of 12.5. So how would we change that on our balance sheet? Again, let's get rid of these. Fixed asset turnover was 12.5, so 12.5. And this would be fixed asset turnover. And our formula will simply be equal to our sales on our income statement, because fixed asset turnover is sales divided by fixed assets. So we can take sales, divide that by our, again, go back to our balance sheet. And unfortunately, Excel covers up the formula we need. So let's click back over there and then scroll over balance sheet D11. And there we have our plant, property, and equipment. A 25% increase of sales resulted in a 25% increase in fixed assets. If we wanted to improve our fixed asset turnover, we would need less in the way of fixed assets. So this is how we can change or recast our pro forma to make it slightly more user-friendly. Let's go ahead and take a look at your next assignment. It's a fairly short one. In this assignment, what I want you to do is I want you to recalculate accounts receivable and inventories, and also cost of goods sold and selling general administrative expenses. These you're going to do as a percentage of sales. And on your balance sheet, inventory you're going to calculate using your inventory turnover, and accounts receivable using the collection period, much like the video we just watched. Read through this notes page, and we can see we have different ways we can calculate cost of goods sold. We could calculate it as a percentage increase in sales. We could calculate it as a percentage of sales. In terms of accounts receivable, we might link it as a percentage of sales. We might do it in terms of accounts receivable turnover, or we could do it in terms of an AR collection period. And you can look and see how our formulas in each one of these cases changes slightly. If we do it as a percentage of sales, if AR is 3% of sales, we would simply take 3% times our sales that I've got right there. And there we have accounts receivable. If it was in terms of accounts receivable turnover, we'll simply take our sales and divide it by our AR turnover ratio. We've got 405. In terms of a collection period, again, we would simply take our average daily sales, that's the 13,500, divided by 365, and then multiply it by our collection period. And again, we've got in this case 740. If we wanted to get the same thing, obviously we need to shorten our collection period. Let's try, what was it, 10.95 days. We've got the exact same balance for accounts receivable. We can cast it as a percentage of sales in terms of AR or in terms of a collection period. And again, if we were to increase our or decrease our sales, our receivables will change accordingly. So when you build your pro formas, you have your choice in terms of how you want to construct it, in terms of what particular combination of factor and formula. Scroll down through and read through this exercise and examine the different formulas we have for cost of goods sold, examine the different formulas we have for SG&A, and then complete these two tabs on your balance sheet and on your income statement. The last assignment we have in this particular chapter is building some additional pro formas. Go ahead and click on your tabs for problem 1 and problem 2. Any correct answers will be verified with a blue colored font. Let's look at the first tab. Here's some information or assumptions we're given regarding the income statement and some assumptions for our balance sheet. We're told that sales will increase by 10%. And again, our formula will be simply last year's balance times 1 plus the 8% increase. So equals last year's sales times the quantity, 1 plus an 8% increase. Cost of goods sold will increase half as fast as sales, so we'll have a 4% increase in cost of goods sold from last year. Equals prior year times the quantity, 1 plus a 4% increase. Gross profit is simply what? Sales minus cost of goods sold. Our expenses, operating expenses, will increase at the same rate as sales. So if sales are increasing by 8%, we want the same increase in operating expenses. So again, equals prior year times the quantity, 1 plus our 8%. Earnings before interest and taxes, gross margin minus expenses. Interest expense will equal our interest rate, our debt, times, we have a 12% interest rate, so let's put 12% over here. We're going to need to link this to debt, so equals our interest rate times, there's no debt on our balance sheet yet, but that's where our debt's going to be, so hit enter. Earnings before interest and taxes will be EBIT minus our interest expense gives us our taxable income. Our tax rate, 43%. Our income taxes then will be equal to our taxable income times 43%. Finally, our net income will be our taxable income or earnings before taxes minus our income tax expense. Current assets, let's look at our balance sheet assumptions. Current assets will increase at the same percentage of sales, so let's link that to sales. Equals to prior number times the quantity, 1 plus our 8% increase. Fixed assets. Our fixed asset turnover is 1.6, so let's put in 1.6 as our factor, and we're going to take equals sales divided by our fixed asset turnover. We've got our fixed assets. Total assets will be fixed assets plus current assets. There we've got our assets section of our balance sheet. Let's go ahead and look at our current liabilities. We're told our current ratio is 2.8, so let's put 2.8 over here. Recall our current ratio is current assets divided by current liabilities. So we have 2.8 times as many current assets as we have current liabilities. So if we take our current assets and divide it by 2.8, we end up with our current liabilities. Again, our debt will be our plug, so we're going to hold that off to last. We are told that Pace issues $10,000 in new common stock. So common stock will be the prior year plus $10,000 in additional common stock. Retained earnings. We aren't giving any information regarding dividends, so we'll assume they don't pay dividends. So we'll take equals prior year's retained earnings plus net income. And I'm just going to put minus 0 to reinforce that notion of no dividends. Ending liabilities and equity will be our retained earnings plus our common stock plus our long-term debt, not there yet, plus our current liabilities. Finally, last step, we're going to do our debt plug. This will equal our total assets, $363,150, minus current liabilities, minus common stock, minus retained earnings. Once I hit this enter, watch what happens to my interest expense. It goes up and net income goes down and my pro forma balances. You're going to work similar type of thing on the second tab of your pro forma, but in this case we're going to do things such as our gross profit margin is 46%. That means cost of goods sold is what? 54% of sales. So we're going to want to take equals whatever number we have for sales, multiply it by 54%. That will be our cost of goods sold. Okay, so good luck with the second worksheet tab. As you get the correct answers, the font should turn blue for you. If you've got questions on it, feel free to send me an email with a copy of your worksheet and indicate where you're having problems, and I'll see if I can help you out.